So, Dad, thank you very much for agreeing to do this podcast with me. I really appreciate it. After a few rounds of back and forth, we got you on a table with a mic and a receiver with questions approved that we can talk about. So, how are you feeling right now?
Feel great. I'm glad somebody wants to hear from me. What I have to say, whether it's banal or less banal, we'll see.
Mm-hmm. Good. Then I think I would at least like to start a bit from the beginning. I have lots of questions from your early childhood. I'd like to be able to cover growing up in post-World War II Germany in the Black Forest, then moving into your adolescence, and your time then at university, traveling around with some bohemian travels, going to Africa.
What do you mean with bohemian travel?
Well, when I understood you and Klaus going to Africa, for example, and just picking up with a bike or a car, I forget, and just heading down without really a plan or anything like that.
Spontaneous travel.
Spontaneous travel, you could say. But I'd like to start at the beginning. And do you think, so you grew up in the Black Forest in a pretty particular moment in history. You were born in 1937. So you were born into the war, coming into the war.
Right, when the war started, I was 2 years old.
Yeah. And then you also lived in the aftermath of the war.
Yeah, which was much more conscious because the age was there where I could comprehend what was going on before you were a little kid.
So what was it like growing up during the war? What are some memories that you have?
Well, when I try to think back, it's very interesting. Because for somebody like you guys who never experienced war or only know war from the internet or from the books or from TV, we have the war in our own country. The memory is no fear. So you would assume when you, as a kid, live in the war, you would have what the German called Angst, no? Mm-hmm. The Urangst. Mm-hmm. Of course, that is also explainable because I was not directly exposed to warlike actions. Nobody was shooting around our house. Mm-hmm. But we were in the war. My parents were worried. My father was worried. My brother went to war as a young man. And we knew that there was shooting and there was danger of life. But as a child, you were not scared. Zero scared. So when they talk, a kid is highly traumatized. Maybe obviously it's traumatized when it's directly involved. But it lives in a society that is in warfare and is protected within the family. I don't think I cannot say I'm traumatized at all.
So to clarify, you never joined the military effort, so to speak.
I was too young.
You were too young.
Far too young. But the most salient memory of the war are two actions. One is lying as a child, we talked about that before, like a child in my bed at night, and you heard the Allied airplanes coming in. You lie in bed, you hear Then you heard my dad going down to the radio, asking information, and they said, we have 3 Flugverbände, flying units maybe, entering the Reich from the southwest. We believe their objective is going to be the industrial center around Schweinfurt. Schweinfurt was essential for the war industry because it's where they made the ball bearings. Mm-hmm. So that were tactically and strategically war objectives. Mm-hmm. We don't need to talk about that right now, about this part. But anyway, as a child, I was lying there, I could hear that. And sometimes we went out on the balcony when there was a clear night, full moon, winter sometimes, and you saw these aeroplanes going over by the hundreds in a very orderly formation. Mm-hmm. And around them, like dogs, the fighters to protect them. Mm. Back and forth, the fighters. No? And then suddenly you saw thousands of little aluminum spirals floating down the sky. So these guys were throwing up, they looked like little, when you make a Christmas present, when you put a little bandage around it, mm-hmm. then you do with a knife like this, yeah. So it curls. Mm-hmm. These were aluminum curls, mm-hmm. glued onto a paper surface, coming down the sky, and we kids collected those the next day, because they were meant to disturb the German radar, mm-hmm. so they were not being able to see them. Mm-hmm. And that was one part of the war. The other part of the war was the direct attack by aeroplanes on the power station and on the office of my dad. Mm. One has to remember that in the last year maybe of the war, Americans had complete supremacy of the skies. Mm. Because in Germany interesting, Germany still had the highest fighter output. Also, everything was destroyed. They still were building fighters like crazy. But they didn't have the pilots. They didn't have experienced pilots, because all the experienced pilots were dead 3 times over. Mm. And I add in parentheses now, that's why I say the Ukrainian cannot win the war, because they don't have people. Hmm. They have the arms. We had the arms. We were not short of arms. We had no people, or no experienced people. So no way.
The fighting units, yeah. Experienced fighting units.
German young guys, 17, 18-year-old pilots, went up. I would have been one of them, obviously. Mm-hmm. And maybe had two, 3 sorties, and it didn't come back. They were dead. Anyway, so this I watched with my friends. Our house was on a slope, very lonely, not lonely, but isolated in a field. Or we could see these airplanes flying, 2 of them, over our house, very, very low. We were higher than the planes. They were shooting down into the valley where my dad's power station was, with a big lake, artificial lake. And what I remember as a child, because war is basically abstract for a child, but I could see in the airplanes were people. Mm. You could see the profile of the pilots. And I never forgot that I could see, these are real people shooting at us, and this is how they look. These were my sort of war impression.
And your house was not in this town, but a bit outside. On a slope in the Black Forest.
No, we were on a slope playing. So the house was further down, and we were on a slope up there. So the airplanes came in, and you could see, we were above them. Yeah. You could see, look in the...
They're coming into the valley,
You could look in the cockpit, so to speak. They were down, they were shooting, and we were all worried, and it was over. They were so... It was all a thing of minutes. Mm-hmm. And then we tried to telephone and find out with my dad. And they were shooting into the cooling system of the power station, because you need to cool. You need cooling with oil when you change the voltage of the power. Mm-hmm. Because this was a power station. They made electricity and you send it away. Mm-hmm. So you bring it up to a certain tension, presumably. Mm-hmm. So in my dad's office was a beautiful building, a little bit like the architecture here. Mm-hmm. My dad's office was, shots went right through the window, through his chair, to the back of his chair, into an armadio, into a cupboard, when he showed it to us later on. When these airplanes came, he could see them coming down, because this power station was down,
Sure.
maybe 200-300 meters down. He said, everybody off and lie below the windows. We were trained in school already as little kids. When you are attacked, where are they coming from? You lie down below the windows. With your French windows here would be no good.
Yeah.
But we had windows you could lie down and would be protected.
Was that because A, pilots couldn't see you?
No, because
B,
the guns couldn't go
penetrate.
through. No, we had war.
Yeah,
That
penetrate.
would not, with machine guns, you wouldn't get through that. You wouldn't need bombs.
Mm-hmm.
These guys were not bombing, they were shooting projectiles. So had my father not sit on the table, he'd been dead. Because his chair was, I remember very well, here and here. But he was not shaken either. Oh, okay. I think people are not only kids, people develop a fatalistic attitude unless they're directly involved into actual warfare when you're bombed out of your house. But when you're bombed out of your house, because I met many people who were bombed out of their houses, you are in shock. And you realize what happened to you only later, the process.
So, in a sense, you were very young when you experienced the war, and you sort of experienced it in two ways. First, it was the sound of these planes coming down, either late at night,
still like yesterday,
during the day, and that maybe is a bit distant, right? But second, quite close, because they were actually going after key strategic points.
Yeah.
And your father was the manager of this power plant, this power station in the valley.
There were 3 or 4 power stations. They were interconnected.
Yeah.
Because the concept was the water runs down from the top lake, goes through the first set of turbines, goes in the second lake, goes in the second set of turbines, goes in the third set of turbines, and then it goes down into the Rhine Valley, in the Rhine, out of the Black Forest, maybe a distance of 40K, 30-40K. And at night, when power is cheap, you reverse the turbines and pump the Rhine water up into the lakes again. And then in daytime, when the power is needed, you start them again. These hydroelectric power stations originally are made to cover peaks of power consumption. They are not meant to, like a coal power station, continuous supply. They are meant to cover the peaks, because they can start it up in minutes.
You can just let the water flow
Boom,
and spin the turbines up.
Go.
So in one way, the war was far through sound, but close through family.
Yeah, it was closer then, because then in the next morning, or maybe hours after the swarms coming through, the airplanes came back. Not always, sometimes they continued some other direction, but often they came back. And the formerly orderly formations of maybe 7, 8, 9 planes next to each other in a sort of triangular form, they were all over the place, completely disorderly, burning, smoking. I haven't seen fire, but I've seen a lot of smoke. And in our area, they were very heavily concentrated because they were trying to escape into Switzerland. They didn't want to crash in Germany or jump out in Germany. We were only about 20K from the Switzerland border. So they went over there and jumped out in Switzerland. And the planes crashed, and that's when my brother was scavenging the wrecks, came back with machine guns.
So, and that's interesting. So you grew up in a time when planes coming down and bombing your surroundings or firing at your father's workplace was quite a normal thing.
Well, it was obviously the first time and the only time, but there was no shock. You didn't run home and say, "Oh, Mama, what happened?" It
was part of the day.
Yeah, we knew also, I have not experienced this, but I refer to the air superiority, that the Allies basically, when your mother would send you with a bicycle to buy some milk, we had to buy milk in cans. You didn't have containers. There were metal containers, aluminum containers. There was always one milk station in every little village. If you had bad luck, they would shoot you off your bike. There was free hunting.
They didn't discriminate between
No.
military, non-military.
No, free hunting.
Civilian, non-civilian.
When you drove with my father, we were one of the few people who had a car in this whole area. You always had on your car a man called the looky man. Looky means look out, no? Mm-hmm. These were not cars like today. These were still cars with mudguards and a lamp on it. So you were sitting on the mudguard with a lamp, left and right of your leg, and the center was a lamp. And you looked out for airplanes, because you don't see them in the car.
And what would you do if
you would do like this, like this, the driver, you pulled under a tree, you all jumped out, went into the ditch. And,
so you drive off the road, run under the trees.
Under a tree, if there was one, hiding under a ditch, in a ditch.
So besides these, so I can imagine growing up and playing as a kid. My memories of playing as a kid are in the square in Rome, in the neighborhood, or on the playground at school. But your playground was a little bit different growing up. It was
it was not an urban play. You had an urban playground.
But you played in the Black Forest. But then
in
also
the woods, in the fields, in the little streams.
And the toys you had were also a bit different, even as a result of the war being sort of fought nearby. I'm alluding to when Klaus would go and scavenge for different parts.
Yeah, but
brother.
To be distinguished, two things. One thing, when we grew up as children in the wild, so to speak, our playground where we made little ships ourselves, we made little cars ourselves, out of wood, toys. And there were all little streams, sort of maybe half a meter wide, even smaller. Mm-hmm. And we made ships races. We had little ships which went down these little streams. We had little poles, see who's the fastest and so on. It was a very free life in summer without shoes. There were rocks. And my mother had a lot of fantasy. And there was maybe a large heap of soil for one reason or another with a tree or not. She says, that's a giant's grave. That's definitely a giant's grave, which is called Riesengrab in Germany. So the giant's grave for us was a fixed point, a landmark.
A location on a map.
Landmark.
Yeah.
Or there were rocks where some water was flowing over when there was a lot of rain. And we called it the sliding rock or the glatte Fels, when you were sitting there and sitting in the water and played. We had wonderful things. We had no toys, commercially manufactured toys.
You had to use a bit of imagination.
Or very few. I had some for my brothers because they had them before the war. No? Mm-hmm. But no new toys. Basically no. And we had also a very fun game when we got a bit older. We went into the trees. These were all fir trees, young and old ones. And we had a technique to go up in the fir trees, go out on the branch and then fall down, let ourselves fall down between the branches. Tuk, 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 hoping your parents wouldn't see you. You played with what surrounded you. It was, and of course, motor cars for us was not like something for you guys. A motor car, when you were playing with your friends, I had 2 or 3 friends from the neighbor house. When you played outside, there was no industrial noise, zero industrial noise. Then you could hear a motor car somewhere, far away. Oh, there's a car. We are running up to the road, maybe 50 meters away, 60 meters away, maybe more. Stood on the road, hoping the car would drive by. Stood there, watched the car drove by, then you went home again.
That was the event of the day.
The event of the day. And it was also the event, coming back to the war, on the road, in the cars. When the Allied troops eventually invaded Germany, or liberated Germany maybe is a better term, we were in the areas, they divided their work. The Brits went in one area, the Americans in another area, the Russians came in from the east, the French came in from the southwest. We were in the French zone. And they were in Freiburg. People, 60 kilometers away, people said, oh, we have been occupied now by the French. They're coming up to the Black Forest. Then we had all these stories with my brother, which would be an extra chapter almost. Mm-hmm. But anyway, coming back to the road and the cars. We went up to the road to see when these guys come. And I never forget, there was the first car was a let's say, all-terrain machine, big car, soldiers sitting on it outside with their guns like this. We stayed on the road and waved to them, said, oh, hello, you know. And this was the first car. This was a dangerous job these guys did. There could be a fanatical SS people behind any tree. Mm-hmm. They came there and the kids stood there and waved. Oh, we could have been fanaticized kids who saw a hand grenade. I mean, all these things happen. Not in our area. But that was the other area, how mechanical things like cars, even in the form of war tools, were so fascinating for young boys. So contrary to you guys, we did our driving license as soon as we were allowed to the next day. Mm. We didn't wait another 5 years. Mm. We were driving cars. We had a toy which we built ourselves or inherited. There were bushes being cut for field clearing. And there were little stubs sticking out. We were sitting in the stubs and pretended we were driving a car. And the stubs were the various gears and levers. Mm-hmm. And you could play for hours driving, making a changing gear, no? It was our toys. Wonderful life.
Wonderful life. A bit of very different than today. When you said we didn't have new toys, we had to build little boats, pretend that sticks out of the ground were different levers in a car.
There were some old toys for my two brothers. My parents were my father was very good, he was an engineer. He was very good to provide his boys, Klaus and Wolfgang, Klaus was 8 years older and Wolfgang was 10 years older. They had pre-war toys, nice stuff. For example, they had an air gun.
An air gun?
A really nice air gun, I never forget. When you have a gun as a young boy, when you walk with a gun, you know how the Americans feel when they have a gun.
Powerful.
You feel power. You were a little kid with 10 years old. Mm. But we had no ammunition. These little lead bullets, no? So we took paper, crammed it together, made it wet, bit on it, making it as hard as possible. Then we put this in the air gun and shot these little things out.
Can you explain what an air gun is?
Air gun is a pump gun. It's a gun where the propulsion is not part of an explosive process with powder, in other words, a chemical reaction. Mm-hmm. It is a piston, like a bicycle pump. Mm-hmm. And that piston is squeezed by cracking the front part of the gun like this. And then it's loaded. And when you trigger it, there's such an air pressure on it that it spits a bullet out. Hmm. And sometimes we found some bullets somewhere. Anyway, that was, and we had nice stuff. We had bow and arrow, huge bow. My father was basically dangerous that he bought my brothers a bow and arrow. I don't know how big the arrow was. It was a little kid, but so much bigger than I am. And arrows with little feathers and stuff. They had all this kind of wonderful stuff.
You had all this kind of wonderful stuff, and on the subject of weapons, there was once a story where I remember Klaus ran out and found a bunch of munitions or rifles from crashed planes.
Yeah.
And that was, I guess, another way in which the war was quite close.
Yeah,
and the toys
that was
you were using.
End of the war.
Where?
Well, if you want to, we can enlarge our talk a bit about my two brothers and the war,
Absolutely.
which will lead into this. My two brothers, and it also leads into understanding of the Hitler Youth.
So Wolfgang and Klaus.
Wolfgang and Klaus. Wolfgang was born in 1927.
The oldest.
Great guy. And Klaus was born in 1929. He was a wild guy. Wolfgang, the older one, was the wise. He was born already a wise man. And very much almost admired by his mother because he was so mature, early mature. And both my brothers had only one wish, to become soldiers. And Klaus told me his biggest concern was the war would be over before he could be a soldier. So it's something unthinkable today. And we were a very non-militant, non-Nazi, good bourgeois family where militarism was not really part of the scene. But the kids were so indoctrinated through the environment, basically the National Socialism system, that they wanted to go to war. And I remember my brother, who was first called up when he was 15. They were so-called air defense helpers. They helped, we had a lot of air defense guns in Germany all over the place because of these airplanes we talked about. In our area, they had quite a bunch of guns to protect the power stations. And my brother was then called up, went to some area, Lake Constance somewhere, where they got some basic training. They were kids. They had a very shabby uniform, and were helping the soldiers loading ammunition and doing load jobs, no? But then they were called to the Arbeitsdienst. Arbeitsdienst was literally translated work service. The National Work Service meant that you would help preparing our defenses against enemies. And Germans built this huge so-called Westwall, the Western Wall, which was meant to be unpenetrable, a big wall through Alsace, Lorraine, up there, all the way up north.
Along the French border.
French border, Belgian border. And my brother, it was already in the war, and my brother, at the first time he experienced war death. They were attacked by the planes, and quite a bunch of his friends were shot dead. So the first time he knew that it was not a game.
And how old was he?
16, 15, 16. Little kids, all little kids, young kids.
And this was not someone who was fighting, but someone who was just part of the
shoveling sand, literally making war. Anyway, then he came home, and he had a long debate with my father. My father was a very strong anti-Nazi person, but he did his job in running the power station. He was not fighting in the underground. He was just not a Nazi, doing his job and being decent as much he could. And they talked that my brother might be called up, enlisted, to the SS. And already then we knew, or they knew, that SS involved war crimes.
So can you just take 2 seconds to explain the SS?
SS
What outfit were they? What was
SS
their role?
was special forces, which were a parallel army, parallel to the army.
Mm-hmm.
And reported to a guy called Himmler, who was a terrible criminal Nazi. And they were meant to be an elite troop. They were all meant to be super German looking, tall, blonde. They were the Aryan race, or the Aryan warriors, SS. And there were even apparently some, I'll read later on, initiatives where they were trying to sort of to get them with equally selected women together to breed young Aryans. But I don't know how much is folklore. I don't know about that.
But Himmler reported directly to Hitler. So this was...
No, to Himmler.
But Himmler to...
Himmler was one
directly.
of the underlings of Hitler, but he had the SS, and the S was... Did he have the Gestapo as well? I don't know whether he has got the secret police. But the SS he had anyway. And there were special buildings, physical military educational structures constructed a little bit along the line of old castles, Romanticism, where these guys were trained right before the war already, no? SS-Ausbildung, and they were extremely tough elite troops. And they were also most likely fanaticized also.
Indoctrinated to a certain extent.
Yeah, but they were in military terms, they were like the Marines. You
Elite
would never,
fighting forces.
elite would never leave any of their people lying wounded or dead. They would always retrieve them, like the Marines, the code of honor. So the Marines and the SS are not that far apart. The only thing is the SS had this racial injection from their leadership. But they were considered elite troops. When the army was having breakdowns in the fronts, they tried to call an SS tank division. And the SS tank division just would go in
and sort things out.
Clobber the Russians or the Americans, just knocked them out. These guys were brave. And of course, as a young man, you admire that.
They were the highest calling, you could say.
That's sort of, that's the shining armor.
And so I imagine
So
to
my
get
brother-
people excited, they did a lot of to promote that image.
Yeah, my brother would have liked to go there. My father said, no way, you will not go to SS, we will not even think about that. I want you to volunteer so you can escape to being called up. So he volunteered to the Navy. And I remember, this must have been 43, 44. He was born in 27.
Was this Klaus or
Wolfgang,
we're talking about?
27. Well, he was 17, 18. He was called up. When he was so happy, he threw himself, but he was a very disciplined young man. He threw himself on the floor. He was so happy.
That he was
called up
for the Navy.
The Navy.
Yeah, he was selected.
Had a piece of paper. Oh, I'm going to go to the war. And Klaus being very envious that this guy can go to war. So my brother disappeared on the Baltic Sea, became a young sailor, went through the formation. The Navy was has not been permeated by Nazi thinking. The Navy had an old tradition from the Kaiserreich still, from First World War, from the Emperor. It was an elite troop. They had...
I think you might be covering up your mic if you do that.
They had an elite...
There you go.
They had an elite troop. They were disciplined. They had an esprit de corps. They had a pride. You were proud to wear the uniform as a Navy soldier. So he disappeared up there. We were home, and he always sent us very nice letters and little drawings from his ships where he was on, wrote what he did. He was a real good man, wonderful guy. And my brother was struggling. He always wanted to go to the war, and he couldn't go. And eventually he was also called up. Must have been 15, into a so-called Wehrertüchtigungslager, typical German word, Wehrertüchtigungslager. 3 words made one into one, which was defense efficiency formation camp. Defense efficiency formation camp. So they called these little kids up. Mm-hmm. And gave them some basic training. Then they got a Tiger tank with some older soldiers. Tiger was this huge tank, mm-hmm. which had an 8.8 flak on it, basically an air defense gun. And they were told, go to war with this tank. 1 tank and kids behind. And when Americans caught them, they didn't even make them prisoners. They took them, cut their pants off and sent them home because they were little kids.
They were so young.
But they were fanatical soldiers, some of them were. There's a wonderful film, maybe you can see it one day. It's called The Last Bridge, Die letzte Brücke, with, I think, Maximilian Schell. A wonderful film depicting these poor, misguided kids who then collapse under the pressure. They cry in the battles.
There's a recent movie made by this director, Taika Waititi, called Jojo Rabbit. Have you seen that movie? Mm. I think you'd enjoy it very much. It's very similar to that. It shows a young boy growing up during the war, and it reminds a bit of Klaus or Wolfgang. He has blonde hair, blue eyes, and he wants nothing more than to join the military war effort. Yeah, he goes around putting posters. He's on the hunt for Jews, and it tracks the story as he joins one of these training camps, and he gets injured, and unfortunately he can't join the war anymore. And along the way, he also discovers that his mom is hiding at home a Jew, this young lady. So he strikes up a weary friendship with this girl, and then suddenly peeks behind the curtain of all this propaganda. And then it tracks his journey, fighting with this inner struggle of his identity versus...
What is the movie called?
It's called Jojo Rabbit. Jojo Rabbit. We can watch it together.
Yeah.
It's a very good movie.
Yeah.
I think, and Taika Waititi is a very particular sense of humor that he injects into this movie. So there's moments where it's very heavy, but throughout it almost feels like a comedy. Mm. So it's still very palatable. It's not entirely heavy, you could say, throughout the whole experience. But anyway, so Wolfgang joins the Navy.
War, Klaus
was struggling, but he gets called.
Wehrertüchtigungslager.
Yeah.
My father was in that part of the Black Forest a well-known man. Mm-hmm. Sort of I wouldn't call it, today they would call it a prominent figure, but he didn't want to, he was just a well-known man, because he had this was the only industrial activity, so to speak, and he was a very good man anyway. So he went into this camp and pulled his son out.
So Klaus sort of joined without really getting the
Klaus
consent
wanted to
from
go
his
into war,
parents.
and his father went in and just said, you're not going to get that kid, forget it. We are not going to do that. He just took him home with sheer personality. Mm. Sheer personality. He went in, pulled him out. I spoke with Klaus about it. So Klaus had to come home. Anyway, the war was just about over, and quite a bunch of young comrades from Klaus, maybe even some friends, died in the last days of war, the last hours of war for these fanatic idiots. So apropos last hours, my father was requested by the Nazis had an entire network in the nation of an organized party system which penetrated entire communities.
Eyes and ears.
Yeah, parallel to the mayor, you had an Ortsgruppenleiter, the local group leader. There were two parallel structures. And these were, sometimes they were in sync, sometimes they were opposed. So anyway, this S came, the SS soldier we talked about, fanatical one in this case, and ordered my father to blow up the power station, blow up the dams, blow up everything. Because Hitler, in his last phase of life, when he was in his bunker in Berlin, talked of the Götterdämmerung, the dawn of the gods, which is an opera from Wagner. And he said, the German nation failed me. They were not worth my holy ideals. They failed me.
Could not live up to the vision.
They deserved to go under. He wanted Germany to burn and disappear. So they went into this phase of outer destruction. And they were they obviously didn't want the Allies to have a power station which functions, forgetting that their own people need the power. So my father was meant to blow up all the bridges. And he had 2 or 3 very trusted craftsmen. And they were drilling the holes in the walls. He supervised that. And were meant to put explosives in there. And when the command came, blow everything up. Well, I don't know exactly what he did. I know that they were drilling the holes. I don't know whether they put in dots or whether they didn't put in anything, or they put something in it which was nothing, I don't know. But he sabotaged that. And if he hadn't sabotaged it, this power station would have all been blown up. And quite a few people died when these dams break. There are farmhouses underneath,
Floods.
the valleys, the floods. So he was quite courageous, I think. And Klaus, then comes the story which you referred to before. He said to my mother, I'm going to defend that house. They are not going to get our house.
Against the Allied forces coming
the French
in
this case. So he went away and came. And we were the last pocket in Germany of the retreat of the German army. So they all came to our area, back forest. And the forests were, for our kids' terms at least, full with toys. Kitchens, cars, communication stations, old guns, boxes full of weapons, recoilless guns, Panzerfaust, boys' paradise. And we had a little, what they call in Germany, Leiterwagen. Leiterwagen doesn't exist anymore. These were little cars with little trolleys with four wheels, like this. And he took this trolley and loaded it with guns and came home. And told my mother from far, I remember very well, I was there. Mutti, wir werden das Haus verteidigen, kein Thema. He had also fog grenades and the works, machine guns. The whole bloody thing was full of arms. And my mother got so angry. What the fuck, you know? He didn't say what the fuck. Du spinnst wohl, hau ab, zurück, bring den Dreck sofort, schmeiß es in den See. So poor Klaus was like a wet rat. Had to turn around, go down after he had collected all that shit, had to go down again to the lake, which was about 4 k's, 3 k's maybe, steep pass down, and had to throw it over the bridge. I don't think I came, I don't know, I helped him, I don't think so, I think he did it on his own. And my mother had already prepared huge bed linens, white, which you hang out of the window when the Allied comes, you surrender, no? So on one side, these guys had his machine guns, and the mother had the stuff hanging out.
The one had, so Klaus, even though he was fervently wanted to join the war effort, almost made it, was pulled out, learned that his friends had died to the last hours.
He didn't know, I think he didn't know. We knew that only after the war. Then he didn't know.
Okay, but he still, until the end, was.
Yeah.
He was, until the last minute, was willing to go down with the party.
Absolutely. There were no Nazis.
Yeah.
There were no Nazis. They knew Hitler was a bad guy. In the early days, they believed Hitler was a good man. Mm-hmm. And my brother, this is a story he told me. I wouldn't remember that. He told me, Klaus said, he spoke with my father and said, kind of desperately, okay, Hitler is surrounded with bad people, but he is a good man. No, Papa, he's a good man, isn't he? Hoping that dad says no. My father said, no. The devil is on the top. Der Teufel ist an der Spitze. And my brother went back to his room and cried.
His best friend Hitler, his imaginary best friend Hitler.
His ideal has been destroyed.
I'm interesting you say this because in Jojo Rabbit, the main character Jojo, throughout the movie, he has this imaginary friend. His imaginary friend is Adolf Hitler. And he pops up. It's actually the director of the movie, Taika, who plays Hitler. And you have these aside moments where Jojo's conversing with Hitler and Hitler's whispering into his ear. And at some point in the movie, when Jojo flips and comes to discover the truth, that then Hitler becomes a bad guy all of a sudden. And Jojo's left emotionally destroyed because for years, his imaginary best friend giving him good advice, he suddenly realized he was an evil man as well.
So in this movie, they basically visualized his feelings.
Exactly. So I can imagine that quite accurately then describes for many young boys that relationship too.
Yeah, my brother was desperate. First he couldn't go into war, and then this guy, the father tells him that's the bad guy. The whole world collapsed for this guy.
So the Allies walk through your area, right?
Well, the French,
The French.
We awarded the Americans.
Okay.
The Americans gave you chewing gum.
Americans had the latest
chewing gum.
Coolest.
They gave you sweets. They were nice. They had a lot of black guys who were nice with kids. Mm-hmm. The French have not themselves, because they were occupied by the Germans. They didn't have much themselves.
And not much sympathy either.
Well, not bad. We did not experience bad treatment through the occupying forces. Mm-hmm. In our house, my mother spoke a bit of French because she was from Alsace-Lorraine originally, or grew up there, because her father was an artillery officer there in the First World War. And my mother, when we had refugees from Dresden and from other bomb towns in the house, so she said, and usually when these occupying forces came, the officers picked the nicest houses in the village, kicked you out, and bivouacked in there, and you had to look where you can stay. So what she did, when these guys looked for locations, she had all the kids come with her to the front door. My mother was very smart. And all the kids were staying there. So the soldiers, most likely officers said, well, I have kids at home. I cannot kick these people out.
So some morals, some rules of engagement still remain.
Smart woman.
Yeah.
It was like Gina would have done, I guess. Mm-hmm. And but then we had to give them 1 or 2 rooms. They were very well behaved. My mother cooked for them. Mm-hmm. She spoke French, no? Mm-hmm. And I remember my mother said, Bernhard, she said, they brought me a nice chicken. I cooked them one of our old ones, and we keep the nice one. So she had her little revenge.
She had her little ways of...
Oh, we were hiding our chicken in the attic because the soldiers would all take everything. They needed to eat. They wanted fresh meat, not always canned stuff. American canned stuff was American rations. So we had to hide our chicken on whatever we had under the roof. And they came and said, chicken, chicken. And my mother said, poule, poule in French. Poule. And my mother said, no poule, nix poule. No poule, no poule. And then one chicken was escaping from the attic and was flying down over the roof, down on the road. I never forget that.
Yeah, you grew up with chickens and animals around.
Yeah, and so that chicken flew down, and the soldiers looked at my mom, somehow grabbed the chicken. I never forget that he walked away with it, holding it by its legs, swinging like this, and the chicken didn't complain. And I said, never. I remember that view forever, this guy walking like this. And then I saw the first black guy. A black man came, wanted also.
How old were you by this age?
7, 8. 8. And the black guy came, he was black as shoe polish. And he wanted chicken as well, so my mother gave him a chicken. I was so impressed with the black guy.
So he was French, probably from from a colonial fighting force. Or
but the French had something which I discovered very late in life, and with my brother and I made our Sahara tour to Nairobi. There was something called Opération Leclerc. There was a general called Leclerc. Okay, the French had the African colonies, West Africa and Central Africa, no? Cameroon and then Central African Republic, Chad and all these areas, Niger, Mali, all these areas. So he assembled troops and traveled up the Sahara to Europe. It was called Opération Leclerc. To start the war. And these guys came also to our village. There were Moroccans and black guys. And we had once only Moroccans, which was like a scene of 1,001 Nights. Suddenly these guys had turbans, they had these white coats, they had horses, but had mainly mules, not horses, mules. Mules. And they made open fires. They were sitting in the evening fires, and they were singing their Arab songs. We black forest kids. It was just like out of a book.
All of a sudden you had forces and cultures from around the world on your front door.
Never
small,
seen before.
Middle of nowhere, black forest.
I knew it only from books, a little bit from books.
Yeah.
These guys were certainly making fire. They were their horses. They were riding without saddles. And then we befriended these soldiers because they were nice. These kids were little kids. And I remember I was walking with one. They had always a very strong smell, these guys. Not a bad smell, but a strong smell. And he said, Franzos, nix gut. French, no good. Franzos, nix gut. Deutsch, gut. Okay.
So although he was fighting with the French.
Yeah, but the officers were very harsh with them. They were very harsh with them. But these guys didn't have much discipline. No?
Yeah,
if you wouldn't have discipline, these guys would rape the women and everything. No? But then my mother was incensed, because my mother was very Catholic and very traditionally educated, that when the French army came, and that so many girls in the village, but the village had only 400 or 500 people, I mean, so many girls were shaking up with the soldiers. They found that scandalous.
Why was your mom scandalized by that?
Yeah, this was old moral terms. First, a certain libertinage, so to speak, and then with the enemy. Also, she was not a Nazi. But, you know, these are completely garbled, no?
You're still a patriot in her own way.
Yeah, you don't shack up as French officers who occupy your country. But you shouldn't do it in the first place for moral reasons. But then there came also this Deutschland, whatever, in between also she was not a Nazi. She was anything but a Nazi. She was very, very much in war with the local Nazi representative from the party leader, who was that sadistic teacher, no? Who treated us so badly. Klaus particularly, but me too. Me not so bad. I was a little boy, he was not treating me really badly. But my brother, he was going after. Klaus was a fighter. He looked like Siegfried, blonde hair, tough, never cried, always fighting. So there was an ideal Nazi boy. Klaus would have been a fantastic soldier. He might have gotten killed early, but courageous, no? And even when we were, Klaus and I and the other two Klauses in Freiburg, we visited Normandy together. And we went to all the war cemeteries, which I recommend to all of you. We shouldn't only go to museums. These are also museums, very important. And there's also a German cemetery. And there is one German officer buried. I forgot his name. I can find it again when I look. He was a tank commander from the SS. And he was an incredibly successful tank commander. And we wanted to look for his grave, also he was an SS man. Because I think in one afternoon, he shot, I don't want to say something wrong, but I think in one go on his own, he shot down 9 American tanks, just on his own.
Wow.
He was incredibly successful, young, might have been 28 years old, 27 years old. And he's buried on that cemetery. My brother still had this.
So now, this is recent or
that was in 2020 maybe.
Wow.
2015, 16.
But still, 60 years,
yeah,
70 years after.
Adult man, and we said, let's look. We looked for the German cemetery. It's quite interesting cemetery. It's different from the other ones. We looked for the grave of this. I must look it up on the internet. He was quite a guy, a young man, with a Tiger, tank, shooting another man. So we are totally non-Nazis, but we still had some sympathies with German heroism. And me as a flyer, or kind of guy who thinks he would have liked to be an aviator. I had lots of books and literature about German fighter pilots. And still have them at home, which were for me all war heroes. They were. You know, a guy called Bubi Hartmann, I think he had 300 or 400 kills. 300 or 400
kills.
Bubi Hartmann, I could look it up.
How do you write his name? Bubi.
Bubi Hartmann, Jagdflieger.
Here we go. Yeah, he shows up.
How many kills does he have? 200? More.
Was a German pilot.
Yeah.
1922 to 1993.
Yeah.
Was a German fighter pilot.
Yeah.
The most successful fighter ace in the history of aerial warfare.
Yes, go on.
He flew 1,404 combat missions.
Yeah, in Eastern Europe.
And participated in aerial combat in 825 separate occasions. Here's the number. He was credited with shooting down a total of 352 Allied aircrafts.
That's what I mean.
354 Soviet and 7 American while serving with the Luftwaffe. During his career, Hartmann was forced to crash land his fighter 16 times after either mechanical failure or damage received from parts of enemy aircraft he had shot down. He was never shot down by direct enemy action.
How old was he at the end of the war?
He was...
Well, when is he born?
He was 22, 45, so he was 23.
Younger than you.
So he started the war maybe 17, 18.
So these guys were all heroes for me, and they still are. And I know a lot about the German fighter pilots of World War II. I know their names, I know their scores, I know where they were fighting, I know the type of airplanes. Well, that's my sort of aviation hobby kind of thing.
We can get into that. But I want to sort of continue back with Wolfgang. So Wolfgang selected for the Navy, very excited. And a bit like Eric Hartmann here, Bubi, he was captured a few times, or his ships were sunk.
I think his ship, Andrea told me they found his write-up again.
His journals, his.
Well, you can see how mature he was. Because when he died, he's born in 27, he was 19 years old. He died in 46, no? 18 or 19. He didn't have 19th birthday yet, he was 18 years old. And he wrote this Kriegserinnerung, my memories of the war, dedicated to my parents, so and so and so. He was a serious guy, no? A really great guy. And they found it again. I was so sorry we didn't have it again.
You thought you had lost his...
Yeah, and I want to retrieve it. I want it. When I die, I can have it, but now I want it. And he wrote this story, and I think my father had it translated with a typewriter, because he still wrote the old German.
Cursive, yeah.
I think he writes strange letters, I think. I'm not quite sure. But anyway, he wrote about this, and it's a wonderful summary of his. And I think they were sunk twice.
Sunk twice?
I think so, twice.
Do you remember where he was fighting?
All in the Baltic.
In the Baltics.
All in the Baltics. And his major ship was called Linienschiff Schlesien, which was still from the Kaiser's time, and was converted into, it was a cruise ship, no? Battleship. And it was then converted into a school ship because it was an older ship. And he was a very enthusiastic sailor. And he always writes, Klaus and I visited the places where he was on the Baltic, Stettin, which is today Polish. When he always writes to his parents, he wrote a lot of postcards and letters, that he goes in the morning, gets up early, tries to get on land, goes to church, doesn't want to miss Mass on a Sunday. Man. Really
good guy, stand up.
Really moving. And a super guy, you know. And his story is, of course, a complete separate story. But he eventually got imprisoned in Denmark, here. Because he escaped. The thing was, away from the Russians. Oh God, the Russians are coming. Yeah, Bubi Hartmann was, I think, over 10 years a POW, and they didn't break him. They wanted to break him because he shot these 300 Russians down. They considered him a war criminal because he shot their
Alfred Hartmann was captured by the British and spent 4 years as a prisoner of war.
And then he went in the Russian prisoner of war. How long was he in Russia in prisoner?
Let me see if I can find that here.
Yeah, I think the Brits gave him to the Russians. Bastards. He was at least 10 years in Russia.
Who knows? Maybe we can find an interview of him.
Check. No, there's no interview.
Why was Eric Hartmann handed over to the Soviets?
Yeah, why was he handed over? It's unforgivable. Unforgivable.
I find this on Quora, but I want to find it more official.
Quora is sort of, okay, I have Quora. It's sort of not necessarily always true.
No, so I want to find something a bit more here. It's like a PDF.
Wikipedia, you find it. I think he was 10 years.
He was known as the Black Devil of Ukraine for the Russians.
Yeah.
The Blonde Knight of Germany.
Yeah. Erich Hartmann, Bubi Hartmann.
Maybe this looks like a good...
He was called Erich Hartmann.
Yeah.
And you find him...
Maybe I'll ask Claude.
I think he was 10 years POW in Siberia. And I tried to break him.
Let me ask Claude, our new AI friend, if I can get something from him.
AI, yeah?
Yeah. It's like ChatGPT, but
Yeah.
at this point, with GPT 4.0, better. Do you know you are an expert in World War II history? Do you know Eric Hartmann?
German fighter pilot.
Do you know Eric Hartmann? Why was he imprisoned
In Russia.
by the Russians, by the Soviets?
Yeah.
And why? And how did he come to be imprisoned by them? Hopefully there's no hallucination here, but let's see. Yes, I'm familiar with Eric Hartmann. Eric Hartmann was a famous German fighter pilot during World War II. Regarding your question about his imprisonment, yes, Eric Hartmann was indeed imprisoned by the Soviet Union after World War II. How did he come to be imprisoned by them? Hartmann was captured by American forces on May 8, 1945, during the day of the German surrender. However, in accordance with agreements made between the Allied powers, German soldiers captured in eastern regions were to be handed over to the Soviet forces. As a result, Hartmann was transferred to Soviet custody. The Soviets tried to convince Hartmann to cooperate and work for them, but he refused. Consequently, he was charged with war crimes, specifically the destruction of Soviet property. Hartmann was sentenced to 25 years of hard labor. He spent 10 years in various Soviet prison camps, including the infamous Shakti camp, before being released in 1955 as part of negotiations between Western Germany and the Soviet Union.
So why 10 years were right?
Throughout his imprisonment, Hartmann remained defiant, refusing to admit to the charges against him or to cooperate with the Soviet authorities. His resilience in captivity, coupled with his exceptional war record, contributed to his legendary status in aviation history.
Here we are.
There we go.
Here we go. So the 10 year, my memory is not so bad, actually.
Not so bad, not so bad. But as Bern even said today, he said, your memory is good. Remember? Because you remembered what he was
The
working
heating system.
The heating pump, one of the first heating pumps. So, so your brother sunk or twice?
I think twice.
But never captured? Or?
No, he went to eventually they ended up in Denmark. The Denmark was occupied by the Germans, no? And they were not unfriendly, I think. I gave him something to eat also. Then he was captured by the Brits. They were brought to Schleswig-Holstein, which is close to the Danish border there. And they were imprisoned in the open air, no shelter, nothing. They were digging holes in the grass. And at night they escaped to farms to steal something. Because they had nothing to eat or very little to eat, young guys. And when he was released, when you had an address in the British occupied part of Germany, you could be released because he was a British prisoner. So he gave the name of an aunt of ours who lived there. So he could get out.
An aunt of yours in England?
No, in the occupied part of Germany by the Brits.
Right.
A place called Detmold. Not far from the monument of Arminius, the famous Arminius monument in Germany. He escaped to Tante Eva, who lost her husband in the war. She was my mother's brother died in the war, and she was his widow. And then it was a very moving scene. The war was over. We were all still alive. That I remember very well. There was suddenly like lots of light in the house. Just literally like light in the house. I don't know why. I associated with light. And we were all alive. And some of the people in the village were very envious. Were very not nice to us.
That your family had made it through.
We made it, and they lost.
No house bombed, no family member killed.
No member. I mean, in our village, nothing was destroyed structurally, but many families lost husband, son, 2 sons, brother, uncle. There was hardly. I told you these visits with my brother, with my mother to the houses. Well, I can tell you when we want to. Anyway, we were a family who came so unharmed. Everybody was still alive. Hooray, we made it. But my brother was not home yet. But we knew he was alive. Because it was a long time we didn't know he was alive because there were no communication. And my mother, we had very little food in these days, but we had plums, and she always made in summer a plum cake, very simple, yeast base with plums on it, so like a plum pizza almost, no? But for us, delicious. And she was in the kitchen making that plum cake, sort of almost kneeling down in front of the oven, you know? And suddenly my brother stood in the door, out of the blue. Big guy. Like you, big guy. You know. At least I remember a big guy, might not have been as big as you. And the guy, my mother almost died. She said, I almost fainted.
She was so happy, taken.
Fainting. And then suddenly everybody was here. We said, boy, we are lucky.
You, your brother, Klaus.
Everybody here.
Wolfgang and Mechthild.
Alle da. Everybody alive.
Your sister.
Everybody alive. And from our relatives, we had some people died, like the brother of my mother. But we had not many personal losses compared to other people which were decimated. Families decimated. And in parentheses, during the war, these were all farmhouses in the Black Forest. These are very special houses, usually built on a slope. And they have very low ceilings, they're very dark. And they have in every corner in the living room, they have a called ein sogenannter Herrgottswinkel, it's God's corner. There's a cross with a guy hanging on a cross, dried flowers on it, and family pictures, grandparents, whatever. And in the war, you went in. The husband is there, the brother is there, the uncle is there, the son is there, another son is there. And we went always in these houses. My mother, who was obviously from different educational level from these farm women, was trying to console them and help them and talk to them. And the heartbreaking part was, I was a little kid, when the husband was lost, missed in action. So hope dies last, no? And you saw these wives sitting on the table. They were already wearing black. They always were wearing black in this part of the world. I don't know why. Looked like today the Muslim women looked outside the headscarf on. With 40 they had already
wrinkles,
faces of an 80-year-old today. And then the women were sitting here, they were holding a picture of their husband. I told you the story.
But you can say it.
On the elbow up, a little thread and a ring, her wedding ring. And everybody was sitting there, staring. And when the ring moved, he was still alive. Pure witchcraft, no? But for a young boy like me,
quite an impression.
7 years old. Voodoo stuff, you know. Oh, how does she know? Look at that. The thing moves. Hidden powers of the dead, you know, all kind of stuff. Anyway, this was the time. Everybody came out alive, happy, great. My father always serious heart problems. We knew he wouldn't live terribly long, but he was kind of tucking on. And then In 1946, boom, my brother dies in a road accident, which always killed my mother. I wonder she survived.
How old was he? 46? He must have been 18, not even 19 yet.
Not yet 19.
So he returned from the war, survived 2 times being sunk in the Navy, prisoner of war in Denmark, returned, prisoner of war in England, returned. The whole
In
family,
Denmark and then in northern Germany. Yeah.
then northern Germany, but under British forces. And then was cycling one day around town.
Went to school.
Went to school.
Went to school. Here, my brother, we went to our boarding school, but they were externs. Huysand was the name of our little village, was geographically on a saddle. Literally a saddle. There was a mountain here, and here was where we. Here went down to the power station of my dad. Here went down in another valley where my boarding school was, on this big dome, you know. You have been there once, maybe?
You brought us there once.
Yeah. Anyway, there was my boarding school, like sort of Hogwarts a little bit, an old Benedictine monastery. And that's where these guys went to school. But my brother was already, has been 3 years in the war. So you go back to school and a teacher tried to teach you all kinds of shit. You don't take it. These were soldiers. These were men.
He had probably lived more of a life experience.
These were men.
Yeah.
And you couldn't tell them in Latin, dulce et decorum est patria mori. It's sweet and honorable to die for the fatherland. They said, fuck you. That you cannot teach these boys anymore. They said, this is bullshit. We did it.
And we saw what happens.
Yeah. That's why I say when I sometimes look at the Italian war memorials, which I sometimes always looked when we were on the boat tours, no? When there was one in Sicily. May the day of your death be the most glorious day in your existence. What the fuck, you know? Anyway, these guys were in school and had these old fart teachers. You know, you couldn't sit down and say, the old German school type was not like you. You were sitting in class, teacher got in, you got up, said, Guten Morgen. He said, sitzen, you sat down. That was sort of discipline.
Discipline,
Yeah.
top down,
Always.
hierarchy.
But this guy said, fuck you, you know. They didn't do that anymore.
Some
of them had clothes which was old uniform, because they had no other clothes. They might have been in terrible battles. They might have killed people or escaped death. So teaching was a complete different atmosphere. No?
The dynamics are very different.
When you had a little, often teachers used to be, maybe today less, used to be losers.
Sure.
People who didn't quite make it, and then a little guy, a bit shy, had no authority, maybe very, very knowledgeable in their field, but no personality. Often, that is the old view of the teachers. I know that is not really true. So this, when a teacher was trying to go up, this guy just said, what do you want? What are you talking about? But anyway, my brother went down to school. They were racing, had their bikes, which my parents still gave them before the war. And it was a downhill stretch about 3K, very windy road through the woods. And there was a last curve before it got flat. And that flat curve was used for the counter traffic going uphill, that the cars were very weak, they're not powerful like today. Today a mountain is not a problem. Then mountains were big problems for cars. And people accelerate like crazy and cut the corner when they go up. So most likely this truck cut the corner going up. The only truck in an area of 35 kilometers. There was no other truck, only truck. Goes up there. My brother and Klaus come down, most likely going too fast. My brother most likely in the curve drifting out. The other cutting the curve.
Being tight inside, yeah.
So my brother hit the truck. My Klaus told me he heard him scream. I put him into hospital, very close by, and then they took me down to the hospital a few hours later, but he was already dead. He lived for some time. He was, when you see the old paintings of Jesus waking up Lazarus, you know, Lazarus in the grave. Jesus says, Lazarus, steh auf, komm raus. Then the Lazarus comes out and he's all banded up.
Pale, yeah.
That's how my brother looked completely.
Being held together by
Yeah,
bandages.
he was completely. He was still alive a bit and was moaning terribly, apparently. Anyway, he died, and then. So suddenly the happy post-war situation got a major, to call it dent is a banal term.
It was upended.
Upended. And then it was 1946. My mother was dysfunctional for a year.
Could not speak.
Couldn't speak. Emma had to come back. My father went to the Red Cross, bring Emma, which was our Margarita, no? Came back to the house. He spoke to Red Cross because he had this sort of reputation to be able to do things. Got her temporary leave because she joined the Red Cross.
She had joined the Red Cross during the war effort or afterwards?
After the war, because my parents told her, you cannot do a household all the time. Like Gina, she tells, do something else. Maybe Diana Nera story on Emma. Emma became a very successful nurse and chief of a...
Who was Emma? Emma was
our Margarita.
So she was there taking care of the kids as well,
in the
helping
Black Forest.
Mom.
She was there when I was born. She's for you what Margarita. She was my second mother.
Yeah.
For many, many years. Then later on she became a Red Cross nurse. And and she was completely part of the family, you know.
How did you meet Emma? How did your family
in the
bump
war?
into Emma?
My father was very linked to a group of Catholic men. Catholic, das katholische Männerwerk, Catholic men's works is not the word, men's operation, maybe, you know, something like that. Where Catholic men kind of loosely associated to reinforce each other with the ethics they used to bring into their work environment. Katholisches Männerwerk. They also did some charitable stuff, no? And there was a priest who was looking after a family where the mother was killed by the Nazis for euthanasia. Euthanasia?
Yes, the mother was killed by the Nazis.
The mother was a bit bonkers, so they killed her and find a place for the daughter. And she came to us.
So this little girl, Emma,
Yeah,
she must have been quite young still
maybe 18, 19.
when she came to
20,
help out your mother, Maria.
Yeah, Maria, then she became our help in the house, but she became like a member
Like a
of the
mother,
family,
yeah.
totally integrated, completely. So she came back and ran the house because my mother became dysfunctional, losing the son she could not bear. I was not worried, but I think if she hadn't been so religious, she would have killed herself. I'm sure.
So that was the only hope she had was faith.
Yeah,
In a
faith.
sense.
She was writing. Every day she was sitting down writing. I don't know. My mother wrote a lot of albums and stuff. I don't know what she wrote, but she wrote. And always a red face, dressed black, walking like Nando when she's sort of walking like that. And it took about a year before she came around.
And what effect did that have on you, your oldest brother passing away?
Terrible. Well, it is the first time that you in your young life experience death. I had never seen a dead person before.
Mm-hmm. Despite the war.
Despite the war. I knew about death, but I had never seen a dead person. Dead animals, yeah. Dead person. And then somebody in your family who's very close to you. My brother was for me sort of the hero.
Mm-hmm. You're Siegfried.
Yeah. I was a little guy. And he was already for me a man. He had gloves. And he had these navy pants, which were fine gabardine tissue. And the naval pants didn't have this. They had a lid here. Out of vanity, because it looks very smooth.
Yeah, yeah.
Navy was very vain in their uniform. Anyway, this was my hero. And he called me Klein Siegfried. Klein Siegfried, because I was a blonde little guy.
So he was also quite empathetic and warm towards you, caring towards you, a little guy.
Yeah, a lot.
Yeah.
So it was the first experience. And he drew pictures for me from his ship's stuff. I always wrote little cards and notes. And, you know, maybe it was, I don't know whether it was really a two-way exchange, but for me it was sort of a hero worship kind of thing. No? Mm-hmm. And when you, as a young person, confront the first time death, that is not coming across natural. You know, people say, "Oh, life, death is part of life," or whatever. That's these sort of loose sayings are. Mm-hmm. That's not the case for a child. For a child, death is, well, it cannot be more brutal.
It's an abnormality. It's not part of the script.
No, it's not in there, because when you're young, life is ahead of you, not death, no. So, and it is today they talk a lot of trauma, no? Mm-hmm. And they do now, I just read an interview in the FT about a Dutch psychologist who teaches in America about post-traumatic stress disorder and trauma in general. I think, I cannot say this trauma knowingly affected me, but whenever there was loss in my life, loss, whatever loss this was, the picture of my brother came up.
Anytime afterwards?
Or during loss. For example, when my marriage fell to pieces, I was in this initial phase when I knew I cannot recatch that my wife, Monica, cannot reach her. I just couldn't reach her. I think she was so arrogant, I don't know. Anyway, I couldn't reach her. I was crying a lot. But always thinking of my brother, not of her.
So somehow his death that's the first association you have of death.
Yes.
Is your brother.
Yeah. With loss.
With loss.
Because I spoke to a friend of ours who's dead now, Ingrid. She was a psychologist in Munich. And I said, Ingrid, can you help me? I just don't know. She was at my age. Can you help me? I just don't know. I called in the office. I don't know how to handle this. Why do I always think of Wolfgang when it's about Monica and my marriage? He says, well, Bernd, that's fairly simple. It's loss. You experience loss the first time, and that comes back to you whenever you have. Mm-hmm. Well, that came back then all the time. Whenever there's sort of something like loss, when my brother died, mm-hmm. when my mother died, it's always the first loss which comes up, very prominent, still now.
And probably the fact that you were a kid and he was such a big figure. He was idolized and also probably a myth, a legend in your family. He was
hero worship.
Yeah.
Hero worship.
And then when someone like that,
I put him on a pedestal.
Yeah. And when someone like that, you lose something like that, that's double multiplied the effect almost.
Somehow, I mean, a psychologist could obviously tell me about it, but when Moritz died, same thing. Mm-hmm. Again, it always comes up. But it could be, I wouldn't know, that this experience made it easier for me to deal with loss later on. I don't know, maybe. Because when Moritz died, obviously that is the worst that can happen to you when you lose a child. So suicide had a déjà vu effect. Mm-hmm. And when you experience pain, and you experience the same pain again, it's not as hard.
You're calloused. Yeah. You have calluses.
Not only callous. When I was getting the cane in the boarding school, not a cane, it was a big pole. The first hit is unthinkable, painful, because it's like blitz, like lightning. You feel it in every nerve ending of your body, not only on your ass. You feel it in your ears, in your toes, in your fingers. The first hit. The second not. Second just hurts. The first one is blitz. And I could imagine, that with loss or death more specifically, it's similar.
First is shock, absolute shock.
You say, you lose Moritz. Well, I know that. I don't say I know that. But my body might say I know that. We have been through that.
You've built up more of a resistance, you could say, in some sense.
Déjà vu.
Yeah.
Déjà vu in a banal
been here before.
way. I've been there before. I know how that is. You lost again, somebody unbearable loss again. And maybe when you experience this very early in your life, I don't know whether it's, I think in my case, it made me stronger. It steels you, I think. I don't like the term steel because it's too much fascist term when it comes to young people. But you certainly are more resilient to deal with very, very hard events in your life.
There's also the other version, which could have been that the loss of someone, your hero at such a young age, that could have broken you as well, though.
Yeah.
That could have been a very different story.
Could have been very different. I mean, I was somehow fortunate it worked out this way. It was certainly not my merit. I was a young man. I wouldn't know how to deal with losing my brother, my hero, my ideal, my world, my everything.
That's interesting. Look at, Arnold Schwarzenegger, right?
Yeah, I think he should be president of the U.S.
You think he should be president? Yes. That's another topic. But he grew up in Austria.
Nazi father.
And did you see the 3-part documentary on Netflix?
Yeah, that's all right. I liked it.
So he had an older brother, I forget his name. And his father was the village policeman. or a cop. And apparently the father was unbelievably harsh with Arnold and his older brother. And the disciplining, the rules, stay here, do this, do that. And also physically, if I'm remembering this correctly. And Arnold describes that out of those conditions, he was made stronger in a sense because he fought back, he pushed back. But for his brother, who was much more sensitive than Arnold, according to him, that broke him. And his brother became, if I remember correctly, alcoholic, and never made much with his life, in and out of alcohol and one bad event to another. I think either passed away tragically or commit suicide. I'm not sure. I think maybe suicide. So that's just to say, in any case, part of it is the character as well, perhaps. Something you inherit maybe that allows you to react differently in some sense.
Luck, yeah.
Or maybe it's luck or circumstances.
Luck, and the luck has got maybe some biological reasons, maybe not. Some coincidental reasons. We don't know, we will never know. It's not important. Important is you come through.
And so that was the first hit after the war. And then, of course, your father passed away.
Father passed away, which was not as hard. Not nearly as hard. Because we knew my father was very ill.
You were expecting.
We were in a way knowing that he might. I remember I had a good rapport with my father. My father was not very physical. That's why I'm also not terribly physical. Contrary to Gina, which is Latin and more physical. No?
In what sense do you mean physical? Expressive?
When you embrace somebody, when you physical touching.
The way you express emotions.
Affection, you know. We're more German in general and then more reserved. And I'm getting better, but still. Anyway, but as a young guy, it was always a privilege to go into the bed of my father. When I must have been 10, 11, because he died in 49 when I was between 11 and 12 years old, so I must have been 10, 11. And I liked to lie in bed with him. He was reading, I was reading, and it was just nice, warm feeling. And he said, he spoke, he was from Basel in Switzerland, so he had a somewhat southern German accent, Swiss accent. So. Büble, which is diminutive of boy, you know?
Büble.
What I say to you sometimes when you're a little guy. Büble, wie alt bist? Little guy, how old are you? I said, oh, I'm 11. He said, remember this? And I understood it means I don't live long.
I will not see you grow up.
Yeah. Just no word, only a noise, an acoustical noise between father and son tells you where we stand, both of them.
Did you understand that?
Yeah,
that age?
100%. Exactly what he meant. Little guy. It was almost non-verbal communication, but very interesting.
Yeah.
Both ways. Because my father knew that I understand.
You didn't have to use words to elaborate.
No, he never elaborate, he said. But he knew he would die soon, no? Because his heart was very weak. And that's why his death was for me not such a terrible loss. Also, he was a father who was a bit more remote. The mother was figure who was more present, like our family, Gina is more present. He was more the traditional father, the voice of authority. When there is ultimately a decision to be made, that's the guy will be pulled in. No? So when he died, it was bad, it was a loss. But it was, the personal loss was not devastating. Also, I was a young guy, 11 or 12. It was not devastating. It was devastating was that our life came to an end.
The consequences of
Consequence. Complete elimination of the first 11, 12 happy in quote, years of my life were over.
In the span of a year?
Yeah, less even.
Less.
Rug is pulled. And it was very interesting, because next to our house lived this were both a company house, we had a company house, single house, fairly big, another house with 4 families next door. And these kids who lived there were all my friends or our friends. But they were all craftsmen, they were all electricians. There was always, not for me, but for them, a certain critical adversity, class, because we were the rich
You were
guys.
the managerial class.
Car with a driver, with a garden, with help in the house, big house. They had a 3-4 room apartment. I mean, today I don't think we would get away with that, but then we did. And when my father was dead, I had a little bicycle, and I was standing on the fence with the bike and was arguing with one of the kids there. Then the windows opened and the mother comes out, didn't scream, but almost screamed, saying, now it's over. You're not the son of the big boss anymore. It's over. If you think you're the son of the director, don't think so. He's dead.
Your protection is gone.
It's gone. You suddenly saw that this accumulated anger, resentment, suddenly could break through.
And how old were you?
11, 12. But it was a good lesson. The fact that I remember it so intensely, I know the color of the fence, I know I was sitting on the bike, I know the name of the woman, I know the window, I know everything. Must have been a tremendous moment of awareness that the game is over. A game of protection. The boss's son, Maybe a good thing in a way, You have to fend for yourself. I remember very well that suddenly was, that's it. Over, out.
So 11 happy-go-lucky years despite the war around you. Yeah. Everyone survives, and then within a year, you lose your oldest brother, who was, in a sense, the man of the house, too.
Yeah, sure.
You lose your father, which pulls the rug under you. You no longer, A, income.
Not privileged anymore.
B, privilege. And C...
No home.
No home. And whatever social protection you had...
Gone.
Gone.
Not only protection gone, even flipping into a certain revengeful thinking.
Persona non grata, almost.
Revengeful thinking, a sort of needling.
Yes.
Even the people I went to school with, Herbert Baumgartner was the name of the guy. Nice guy. I was meant to meet him again because he moved to Milano. Somehow it didn't work out. He said, when we went home from school, I was not in boarding because there was no space. Mm-hmm. He said, now you've had it as well. Because he had lost his father in the war. Now you have lost it, you have had it as well. So, that's it. So even the kids would, so that means at home, people spoke about us and these people down there which are not really from the village anyway.
Mm-hmm.
We were always the new people down the road, no?
Mm-hmm.
We were never integrated.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it reminds me of Jane Goodall and the chimpanzees and the warfare, which, as you know, I'm drifting now.
Mm-hmm.
I believe if the politicians who are responsible for immigration would have been reading Jane Goodall, we wouldn't have a migration crisis.
I haven't heard this one before.
Yeah,
In
that's
what sense?
my version.
Elaborate.
Because, now I come back to our house again first. When we moved, I was a little guy, I wasn't even born yet.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I was born a little, to this little village. My brothers, we had the house outside. It was not a farmhouse. It was a house that belonged to the power station. You're getting tired, we make a break.
Mm-hmm.
And my brother, who became architect, built already little huts, houses, house-like structures, very nice ones, primitive ones from packaging material, all kinds of things. Bunkers with a little oven. My brother was a wild guy, not Klaus.
Mm-hmm.
And one day, the boys in the town, in the village, said, "We will come in the afternoon and destroy your houses." Because we were a foreign element, and they had to fight us. Or they came with poles and sticks, going after us, my brothers, and their friends who were all from these craftsmen, who were also from outside, they were not from the village, the next house. It was pure warfare because
Between the kids.
because of foreign element.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why I come to Jane Goodall, the chimpanzees would tolerate in their territory on Lake Tanganyika a certain amount of
Otherness, other tribes. Yeah.
Be it monkeys or other chimpanzees.
Yeah.
But only a certain amount.
But there's a critical threshold.
Yeah, when it was bigger, they started warfare. And we know they did warfare. Chimpanzees do organized warfare, which we didn't know before. They get together and say, let's kill the bastards. No? And people in Europe, America, I don't know enough because of the immigration country, have not understood, the leaders in Europe have not understood that the foreign element can only go to a certain level. Then you reach a threshold. We don't know where the threshold is, but you read it somewhere and it tips over in adversity. And in not only adversity, thinking to become
violent.
Yeah.
And so
enemies, to become enemy. The person who used to be a refugee becomes an enemy.
The person who you open the doors to because they had adverse conditions where they were coming from.
It's too many.
Your guest,
yeah.
All of a sudden you want them exiled, you want them gone.
And the other things they don't understand, it's not racism, not only racism. After the war, we had a lot of refugees from Eastern Europe. Mm-hmm. How many people did we have to accommodate? Can you look it up? I think about 12 million. Mm-hmm. You could, in Germany would say, deutsche Vertriebene aus Osteuropa.
Germany or Europe?
Osteuropa. Vertriebene Deutsche aus Osteuropa. I think we were 12 millions. Who came into West Germany. Poland, no? I think we're 12 million. I think I got the number right.
Schätzungen zufolge wurden zwischen 12 und 14 Millionen Deutsche vertrieben oder flohen.
12 millions, I think.
Etwa 2 Millionen Menschen kamen bei der Flucht oder Vertreibung ums Leben.
12 million is what I said, so my memory is not that bad.
Mm-hmm.
So these people came to Western Europe.
Mm-hmm.
They also came to our village.
Mm-hmm. Dispersed.
Yeah, when there were a few, we had no problems with them. They were all white like us.
Mm-hmm.
When there became more, we started hostile attitudes and actions in a microcosmos.
Sure, sure.
This is what we have today. AfD, microcosmos. And these were not culturally different people. We found already offensive they had a different dialect, that they spoke a different German.
So right now, this debate of migration has a lot to do with Eastern European in some places, but mostly from the Middle East, refugees from the Middle East.
Sure.
Or migrants coming to Europe, settling in Denmark and Germany.
Well, this is what I
Africans
talk
in
is
Italy.
100 years, not 70 years ago.
So your point there is that even within the same region, even neighbors within the same town, you will have this hostility towards otherness. However you want to define your own unit, your own tribe.
Certainly when they come from another part of Germany and speak a different dialect.
Sure.
I mean, amazing. Klaus and I spoke a lot about this. We talked a lot about this. When the early refugees were coming into Germany, which were often at this time political refugees, not yet economic. Today we have economic migration, not necessarily political migration. And we said, Klaus and I said, these guys have no clue what is expecting them. They will get a huge setback.
Huge backlash.
Yeah. Klaus and I said, we said it all the time, we are completely lonely talkers. Klaus' own kid went after him. He said, we are not racist. We know this is what human nature is because we are a little bit more educated than you guys.
You've seen it.
Seen it and read about it. In you could call it popular natural science.
So that was a true fall from grace, you could say, after the war, with your brother and father passing away. A true fall. You became the non-wanted chimpanzees in the broader chimpanzee ecosystem.
Yeah, maybe not wanted, but not any longer seen with much benevolency.
Sure.
And I remember then, I was already in the boarding school then, because eventually boarding school had space for me. And I went back to my home village for a ski competition. And in these days we did cross country and we did jumping. There was no slalom. And I was a good ski jumper because I wasn't scared. And I did a mega jump. I mean, I couldn't believe myself. And there was no...
How many meters? Do you remember the meters? How many meters?
I don't know, but maybe 20 meters, 25.
Still.
And, but it was a little... It was not an amount of which these guys made out of snow. No?
20 meters more than
But they didn't want to give me a prize. Yeah.
They were so...
Oh, it was then sort of,
mumble their way through. Interesting. Well, Dad, I think this is a kind of a natural resting point.
Yeah, I think we should have a break.
Because after this, it kind of goes, I want to open up a little bit about your boarding school days. That was quite interesting.
Yeah, well, that's a different...
And your phone is happening to ring. That's perfect.